Our next speaker is Saida Bondini, who is a PhD candidate at the Courtauld in London and the University of Lausanne in Switzerland. Her current research, titled Networks of Family Patronage in Late 15th and Early 16th Century Bologna, focuses on the artistic and architectural patronage of Bolognese noble families between the Quattrocento and Cinquecento. Her broader research interests include artistic geography, patronage of lay confraternities, and social and artistic mobility. Prior to her doctoral studies, Saida completed her BA and MA at the University of Lausanne in art history and Italian literature, specializing in 16th century Italian painting. She has worked as an intern at the Met, at the Musée d'Art d'Histoire in Geneva, and at the Musée de l'Élysée in Lausanne. Between 2016 and 2017, she was a teaching assistant in the Renaissance department at the Courtauld, where she is currently associate lecturer in early modern Italian art. Give us a hearty welcome for Dr. Bondini, soon to be doctor.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank to the organizer of this symposium for their kind invitation. Being here today gives me the chance to share with you some of the ideas and works in progress related to my current PhD research, which focuses on family patronage in Bologna between the late 15th and the early 16th century. On the 1st of November, 1506, Giovanni Bentivoglio, the so-called Prince of Bologna, fled the city before the arrival of Pope Julius II and his army, who wanted to take back control of the territories of the Papal States. The sources tell us that Giovanni left at night, accompanied by his family, his many legitimate and illegitimate sons, Annibale, Anton Galeazzo, Alessandro, of age 28, as young and beautiful as one would find in all Italy, and Hermes, 24, pale and melancholic, of merciless and crude costumes. The family was also followed by a large entourage of their friends and supporters, illustrious men known in the city for their wealth and deeds. In total, that night, there were 500 horses. Okay? Sure. Let me try again. Is that okay? You want me? Is that okay? Is that okay? You can... Okay. Okay, then. No worries. Okay. So the family was also followed by a large entourage or their friends and supporters, illustrious men known in the city for their wealth and deeds. In total, that night, there were 500 horses. This was the ill-fated end of the Bentivoglio, who, for over a century and 5 generations, gloriously ruled the city of Bologna. The months that followed the night of the 1st of November saw a reorganization of the city, a change in government, reform with new senators elected by Julius II, and a fierce repression of the remaining supporters of the old regime. The sources describe hangings and published punishment aimed at establishing a climate of terror and censorship. And they mention a long list of men accused of sospetto allo Stato and exile after the departure of Giovanni Bentivoglio and his men. The year 1506 and the resulting sociopolitical changes marked a shift in the history of Bologna, which has long influenced the study of its historical context, but also of its art. Art historical writings concerned with Bolognese 15th and 16th century art and patronage have predominantly focused on the Bentivoglio years, stressing the importance of the ruling family's commissions and their role as cultural promoters. During the 15th century, the Bentivoglio justified the lack of an institutional basis for their signoria through a careful policy of alliance with regnal lords and the maintenance of the goodwill of the citizen, but also by means of a systematic strategy of artistic patronage aimed at associating their image with the one of the city, its tradition and landmarks. The ruling family fostered the commission of the chapel in San Giacomo Maggiore, the adjacent church of Santa Cecilia, the sumptuous palace in San Donato, famously destroyed after the exile of the family from the cities, as well as a series of luxurious devotional and domestic objects, some of which are still extant. The overwhelming scholarly attention given to this work, undoubtedly important, has shaped the image of an art market and patronage system dominated by an hegemonic signorial power as promoted by the Bentivoglio throughout the Quattrocento, a court society built on a binary discourse between the so-called prince and his followers, whose dialectic went silent after the fall of the Bentivoglio government. In truth, recent studies, visual and documentary evidence suggest another narrative, one which involved, over a wider time span, a range of more diverse protagonists. The others, those who did not live on that night of the 1st of November, 1506. Among them were not only the enemies of the former ruling family, their political opponents, or minor figures in the civic scene. There were noblemen, wealthy merchants, university lecturers, high-ranking members of the Papal States, of course, and even close relatives, former allies, and supporters of the Bentivoglio. All actors who were not only crucial to the socio-political life of the city, but also to its artistic one. Their presence in Bologna before and after the Bentivoglio time not only contributed to the diffusion of artistic innovation, playing a role no less important to the one of the ruling family, but their patronage also guaranteed artistic continuity in a time of political disruption. Their art collections and artistic commission furthered the establishment of a common, resilient artistic language, expressed through specific choices of artists as well as formal and stylistic types, which endured the turn of the century and the changing government. Today's paper will tell some of their stories. The paths of some of these actors crossed and became intertwined in the Bolognese church of Santa Maria della Misericordia. In the 1470s, the church and the adjacent convent were acquired by the Augustinian order, which promptly oversaw the reconstruction and redecoration of the ancient buildings. Encouraged by the papal indulgences, several of the wealthiest and most illustrious families of the city supported the enhancement of the church through financial donation and the purchase of the ius patronatus of private chapels. In less than 15 years, the church became a preferential patronage site for the Bolognese elite, whose interest in modern artistic and architectural solutions turned the Misericordia Church into a sort of exemplary record of the trends spreading across the city. By mapping the family's intervention in the church, one can thus attempt to retrace on a larger scale the artistic and patronage patterns that dominated Bologna at the time. Among the first private donors to partake in the enhancement of the Misericordia were Bartolomeo Felicini and Dorotea Ringhieri. The couple descend from noble families renowned in the city for their great wealth and their social and family ties with the rulers. It is enough to say that Bartolomeo's and Dorotea's first son married Isotta Bentivoglio, the natural daughter of the so-called prince. The Felicini Ringhieri stood out from the civic elite, also for their prestigious artistic and architectural commissions. This ranged from small precious objects like this rich silver and gold-plated pace, to grander projects as the sumptuous family palace, which the sources recall as worthy of a prince. The climax of their patronage was, however, the chapel constructed in the church of Santa Maria della Misericordia. The building is distinguished due to its privileged location, adjacent to the high altar, but also for its architectural forms that contrasted with the late Gothic architecture of the main body of the church. The chapel's Renaissance features display a clear reference to previous famous Tuscan models, like the old sacristy in San Lorenzo in Florence, whose design was believed to be introduced in Bologna by the Bentivoglio family through their chapel in San Giacomo. The Felici-Neringiri chapel, however, also showed a close proximity to more recent and modern architectural forms, like the one presented some years previous by Giuliano da Sangallo in Santa Maria delle Carceri at Prato. And here you have a comparison between the figurative capital, Corinthian capitals, and the tripartite entablature of the two buildings. The combination of this Sangalesque architectural solution with a Brunelleschian derivative scheme and decorative sobriety had no precedent in Bologna. It produced a successful model that progressively spread in the city to become the new norm for private chapel featuring Renaissance architectural forms built in the following years. This new paradigm was employed uninterruptedly through the late 15th and early 16th centuries, and many are the examples in the main basilicas and churches of the center that testify to the persistence of this language until at least the 1520s. The magnificence of the Felici-Neringiri chapel was further enhanced by the positioning of the grand altarpiece, conceived in the 1490s by the Bolognese Francesco Francia, today dismantled, but here reconstructed. And you can see the patron Bartolomeo Felicini kneeling next to Saint Sebastian. Like the architecture of the chapel, its altarpiece also enjoyed great success. Its forms were aped and reemployed in the city, interestingly, often in tandem with the same chapel's architectural scheme. The two combined almost became a systematic formula. Significantly, among the patrons who have embraced this emerging trend were the rulers of the city themselves. The new altarpiece commissioned by Giovanni Bentivoglio for the above-mentioned family chapel in San Giacomo bear strong similarities with the Felicini painting in the choice of artists, formal elements, and subject matter. The derivative relationship between the two works was first recorded by Vasari, well informed on the commission through direct contact with Francia's sons while in Bologna. I quote, "The first work that he, Francesco Francia, made was a panel of no great size for Messer Bartolomeo Felicini, who placed it in the Misericordia. And he gave such satisfaction in Bologna that Messer Giovanni Bentivoglio, desiring to honor his own chapel, which was in San Jacopo in that city with work by this new painter, commissioned him to paint a panel." The use of terms such as prima tavola and nuovo pittore stress the innovative character of the Felicini altarpiece, allegedly the first to be painted by Francesco Francia in Bologna. The connection traced by Vasari testifies, indeed, to the positive reception of the new altarpiece in the city, but it also provides an example of artistic exchange in which the traditional patronage hierarchy is reversed. It is not the model introduced by the prince, Giovanni Bentivoglio, to be imitated by his courtier, Bartolomeo Felicini, but the other way around. The political leader becomes a cultural follower. The innovations introduced by the Felici-Neringiri had immediate response in the following architecture and decorative intervention fostered in the Misericordia. From Bartolomeo Felicini to Bartolomeo Manzoli, the members of the Bolognese social and financial elite continued to sponsor the construction of private chapel in the church. Bartolomeo Manzoli died before the completion of his funerary chapel, and his last will was carried out by his wife, Francesca Sacrati, herself a figure of major relevance, if not yet in the Bolognese artistic scene, in the one of the neighboring city of Ferrara. Here the Sacrati, a noble family at the service of the D'Este dukes, were among the most important artistic patrons of the Quattrocento, supporting famous artists like Cosme Tura and Antonio and Bernardino Rossellino, who designed Francesca's family funerary monument and chapel. Francesca's unpublished inventory also testified to a remarkable art collection, which included luxurious furniture, several cassoni, large trionfi dorati, and other numerous paintings, in addition to a long list of precious manuscripts and tapestries. For the chapel in the Misericordia, Francesca wished for an altarpiece reminiscent of the one just delivered for the Felicini. Painted by the same artist, and almost identical in its typology, format, frame, and subject matter. The resemblance between the two works was further emphasized by the original position within the church. The two altarpieces, placed one facing the other, inevitably encourage visual comparisons of the future and indirectly of their patrons. Indeed, the decorative refashioning of the Misericordia soon started a game of emulation, repetitio and variatio, between the donors. First triggered by the Felicini, this affected the subsequent commission in the church, fostering its announcement. Among the Misericordia donors, we find again the Bentivoglio, who imposed their presence in the church in the most blatant fashion, by occupying the most prestigious location with the largest altarpiece. The painting intended for the main chapel repeated the scheme of the Felicini and Manzoli altarpieces, but also brought in innovative references to other famous models, like Lorenzo di Credi in Santa Chiara in Florence. Significantly, the choice of artists, Francia in collaboration with Lorenzo Costa, remained the same. Undoubtedly, the unitary trend that emerged from the Misericordia altarpieces is symptomatic of a wider artistic taste catching on in Bologna in those years. Yet, the choice of the patrons to try to outshine previous artistic commissions by remaining within the same artistic language is rather interesting. Prestigious alternatives, namely by Perugino and Filippino Lippi, were available in the city at the time, but the civic nobility in the Misericordia had seemingly opted for an adherence to a common and significantly local artistic type, almost as if to fight the game on equal terms. The trend animating the Misericordia persisted and spread in the following years. The same typological, stylistical, and formal choices here adopted by the families, including the Bentivoglio, were maintained and reemployed within and outside the church for decades, testifying to the persistence of this artistic language, which was not interrupted by the turn of the century or by the following historical events. The political shift did not result in a corresponding artistic change. On the contrary, a resilient continuity seemed to mask the sociopolitical upheaval of the time. Curiously enough, the permanency of taste was also matched by the longevity of physical works. The Bentivoglio main altarpiece, depicting the members of the ruling family in guise of saint, acted both as a pious gesture and a family manifesto. Despite its clear political meaning, the painting was kept in its preeminent position on the main altar long after the expulsion of the Bentivoglio and the change in government. In other cities, like Rimini, the damnatio memoria led to the complete removal of the former rulers' images, like that of Violante Malatesta Bentivoglio, daughter of Giovanni, in Ghirlandaio's altarpieces. In Bologna, this secular iconoclasm instigated the destruction of the dominant family palace, but spared other main works, like the Bentivoglio Chapel in San Giacomo and the Misericordia main altarpiece. In the Misericordia's decoration, the exception that proved the rule is represented by the altarpiece for the Pandolfi, better known as Casio family. The painting, today at the Musée du Louvre, was intended for the chapel of Girolamo Casio. Merchant, humanist, poet, and art collector, Casio was a key figure in the cultural scene of 16th century Bologna, and his presence in the city greatly promoted local artistic production. Casio owned one of the most important art collections in town that included antiquities and works by most famous contemporary painters like Fra Bartolomeo and Mazzolino. Later sold by this heir after his death to none other than Primaticcio. Casio acted as an intermediary between the courts of northern Italy and Bolognese artists, as in the case of Isabella d'Este and Lorenzo Costa, who would have soon left Bologna from Mantua to take the place of Mantegna. Casio's contact with the neighboring courts also helped to bring to Bologna famous artists, like indeed the Milanese Giovanni Antonio Boltraffio. The altarpiece painted by the artist for the Casio Chapel was the first instance of large-format Leonardesque painting in Bologna, and it was destined to become, in the following century, and still today, the most famous of the artworks of the Misericordia. Ironically, its immediate reception did not match its later fortune. despite the innovative stylistic, composition, and formal character of the painting, the tendency that continued to be followed in the Misericordia, like elsewhere in the city, was the one set in the previous years by the Felicini, Manzoli, and Bentivoglio. To witness a true change, we have to wait another 20 years and the assimilation of the innovation introduced by the arrival in Bologna of Raphael Santa Cecilia for the Church of San Giovanni in Monte. It is only at this moment that a veritable shift in Bolognese painting took place and a new Roman, papal, as it were, fashion caught on with the success of Raphael artists like Innocenzo da Imola or, in the Misericordia, Bagnacavallo. A similar tendency can be seen in architecture. With the beginning of the new century, the construction of the Misericordia Chapel continued, featuring donors of no less prestige. Among them, first and foremost, was Giovanni Gozzadini. His family name is certainly known here in New York for the diptych preserved across the street in the Lehman collection at the Metropolitan Museum, commissioned by Giovanni's distant relatives. Gozzadini was another figure of vital importance in Bolognese history, lecturing in law at the Studium, Apostolic Protonotary, Papal Legate, and Archdeacon of the city. During the 1480s and 90s, Giovanni's father, Bernardino, had been close to the Bentivoglio, but had distanced himself from the ruling family to strengthen his links with the papal court. He was subsequently suspected of opposition to the government and murdered in suspicious circumstances. For obvious reasons, Giovanni preferred to pursue his ecclesiastic career in Rome, where he soon became cleric of the Apostolic Chamber and papal treasurer. Giovanni returned to Bologna only when the city was recaptured in 1506, making his entrance in style at the sides of Julius II, leading the Pope's triumphal parade and throwing celebrative golden and silver coins to the crowds, designed for the occasion by Francesco Francia, who, only some years previous, was painting the altarpiece for the ruling family. Giovanni Gozzadini's preeminence in Bologna was not only political, but also artistic. He was responsible for commissioning several major works, including the ambitious transformation of the priory house of San Bartolomeo into a sumptuous palace. Bearing witness to the grandeur of this project is today the surviving portico, featuring the richly all'antica decorated pilasters, whose system of vaulted arches and tripartite entablature was extremely innovative in Bolognese architecture. In the Misericordia, Giovanni Funerary Chapel was celebrated by the sources, which describe it as pulcherrima. The space repeated the architectural arrangement as well as decorative scheme of the chapel previously built by Bartolomeo Felicini. And here I have the two glass windows for the two chapels. The predominant model of the Bentivoglio time was now taken up by one of their fiercest opponents. Giovanni Gozzadini never saw the completion of his chapel nor his majestic palace, as he was brutally murdered in Reggio in 1517. If he did not live to enjoy his artistic endeavors, those who followed did. Among them, Giovanni Battista Malavolta, doctor in law at the Studium, Juris Consultus, and nobleman. In the 1520s, Malavolta expressed the intention to build his own chapel in the Misericordia, which the document tells us had to be no inferior in any way, value, price, and splendor to the one just completed by Gozzadini. That is, in compliance with these latter architectural forms, and in turn with the one of the Felicini Chapel. From a Bentivoglio relative to a papal legate and a university lecture, the artistic model broke down the sociopolitical barriers. Giovanni Battista Malavolta was no luckier than Giovanni Gozzadini, and he too died before seeing his chapel constructed. The works were carried out by his wife, Minozza, who in those years also oversaw the decoration of the other family chapel in San Giacomo, for which she commissioned a grand altarpiece from Innocenzo da Imola and a funerary monument for her deceased husband, attributed to Alfonso Lombardi, or a close master. Here, Giovanni Battista is portrayed lying on his side with a dreamy hair on a background of books, meant to recall his position of doctor-in-law and university lecturer. The Gozzadini and Malavolta chapels well demonstrate the patron's voluntary adherence to a common, formal, and stylistic language. Both donors had financial means and fine artistic taste, as their other commission demonstrates, which would have allowed them to pursue more autonomous and ambitious solutions if so desired. Instead, they decided to subscribe to the decorative and architectural trend prevailing in the Misericordia and in the city. Over the years, this architectural language had evolved in dialogue with Tuscan examples, first Brunelleschi and later Sangallo, and continued to predominate in Bologna long after the beginning of the 16th century, as the chapel in San Giovanni in Monte, built by Arduino Arriguzzi to host Raphael's Santa Cecilia, testifies. Its form were certainly innovative in the use of lateral niche and a central Greek cross plan, but were the result of an innovation within continuity. Once again, the true shift came only years later with the Ghilardi Chapel, built in the 1530s by the Sienese architect Baldassarre Peruzzi. The monumental and triumphal classicizing character of the chapel had no equal in Bologna and marked a turning point in local architecture. Not for nothing, the shift in architecture, like in painting, was promoted by an artist with close ties to the Roman papal milieu. The refashioning of the Misericordia Church relentlessly continued through the 16th and 17th century with the intervention of other leading Bolognese families, like the Ghislieri, Zambeccari, and Fantuzzi. The example presented today cover, however, enough material, I hope, to present some consideration of a more general nature. The Misericordia acts, in fact, as a microcosm mimicking the inner working of the city. The socio-artistic dynamics at play in the redecoration of the church are representative of the multifaceted socio-political nature of Bologna, and in turn of its patronage system. Moving from a micro to a macro level, the lesson learned from this example help us to understand the role played by the different civic actors in promoting local artistic production, to reconstruct the multiple connection and interrelation between these figures, and to question the functioning of the network that brought them together. First, issues that in 15th and 16th century Bologna, artistic production did not systematically submit to sociopolitical hierarchies. That is, political and cultural leadership do not always correspond. It was not necessarily the ruling family who imposed the model to be imitated, rather a system of exchanges developed involving different players. These exchanges were often mutual and intelligent and transcended courtly rules and later historical periodization. The Misericordia case also allows us to observe the development of some intelligible artistic patterns and their diffusion through the city, namely the emergence of a unitary language whose common denominator was an idea of modernity, but in the key of local. This is a time when alternatives, foreign and not, were possible, but often not chosen. The patrons adhered to a common language, but at the same time sought to enhance their personal prestige through artistic novelty, thereby fostering a tension between individual distinction and collegial affiliation. The appearance of comprehensive artistic trend was not imputable to, although certainly encouraged by, single religious orders. The choices of the Misericordia Augustinians were analogous in many ways to those of other Bolognese settlements, like the Franciscan observance of the Annunziata. The emerging unitary artistic trends were neither dependent on political changes whose impact, if any, arrived in paintings like in architecture with significant delay. As a perpetual reminder of this, the Misericordia still symbolically display, one next to the other, the manifestations of power of the former rulers and their papal opponents, visual testimonies of the city's past and present. The Misericordia Church is, of course, only one example. Its donors are among the many men and women who did not live on the night of the 1st of November 1506, and whose patronage had fostered and continued to foster the splendor of Bologna. I could have mentioned Ludovico Ghilardi, patron of the San Domenico Chapel, nobleman, humanist, and intellectual, or Ludovico Bolognini, university professor, senator elected by Julius II, who supported the construction of the splendid library of the convent of San Domenico, or the noble patrician Bonaparte Ghislieri and his wonderful Book of Hours that brought together some of the greatest artists of his time, including Amico Aspertini, Matteo da Milano, and Perugino. The role of these illustrious figures was key to Bologna and his art. These patrons were often also art collectors, yet not much is known of their collecting practices. Differently from the material found by scholars in Florence, Rome, or Venice, Bolognese 15th and 16th century collection and inventories still awaits exploration. Even for a central patron like Ghislieri, we did not possess, until now, an inventory. The unpublished documents list various paintings, including his portraits, some casse veneziane, sideboards, painted coffers, and other luxury goods, all yet to be identified and studied. In conclusion, in 15th and 16th century Bolognese patronage system, the Bentivoglio remain, of course, central, but not as the protagonist nor the antagonist, rather as one of the actors in a wider narrative. Cecilia Edi, in her monographic study of the Bentivoglio family written in 1937, stated, I quote, "The history of Bologna in the 15th century is the history of her dominant family. It was not, or not only, it was the history of Bartolomeo Felicini and Dorothea Neringiri, of Bartolomeo Manzoli, Giovanni Battista Malavolta, and his wife Minozza, of Giovanni Gozzadini, Ludovico Bolognini, and Giovanna Ludovisi. Not a family history, but a history of families." Thank you.